So the WCC Championship game is between Gonzaga and St. Mary's? Always has been.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday, happy WCC Championship Day, and welcome in to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things just a little bit further? Ever wonder what adventure could be just around the corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. All right, folks, we're going to preview Mark Few versus Randy Bennett, Gonzaga versus St. Mary's, the trilogy, the third and final game coming up tonight. For those of you listening to the show on Tuesday, we're also going to discuss the Gonzaga women, who are also taking on the Portland Pilots in another rematch for them, what that might look like. Can they complete that WCC sweep of the regular season and the tournament? We're also going to talk a little bit about Dan Monson being let go at Long Beach State, the former Gonzaga coach who, of course, led the team to that Elite Eight run in 1999. We got all of that coming up today, but we're going to start recapping the game against the Dons of San Francisco. Again, another three games against the Dons. Gonzaga swept all three of them. And yet, in all three of these matchups, so Gonzaga won on Monday, 89-77 was the final score. But in all three matchups between Gonzaga and San Francisco, the score was a 1-point game at halftime. It was a 1-point game at the Chase Center in San Francisco last week. It was a 1-point game in Spokane back earlier in the season. And it was a 1-point game at the Orleans Arena on Monday evening. Gonzaga was up 38-37. But for those of you who watched that first half, Gonzaga wasn't winning for most of that first half. Again, the story very, very similar to what happened at the Chase Center a week prior. Gonzaga did not take a lead until under a minute left in the first half. And San Francisco didn't even come close to getting a lead in the second half of that game. And that was pretty much the same story we saw here. Huge hat tip to Mark Few for making adjustments at halftime, for finding things that work, finding ways to exploit the mismatches on offense, finding ways to kind of neutralize the things that Chris Gurlison and San Francisco brought into that game that helped them help them have a lead for the majority of the first half. Just a really good masterclass in coaching from Mark Few and from their staff. And of course, some incredible, outstanding, electric performances, mostly from Gonzaga starters. Only saw Braden Huff and Dusty Stromer in this one. Both were fine in this game, but this was a game dominated by Gonzaga starters. And really all of them had excellent games. Graham Ike actually had the worst game of Gonzaga starters. He was the only player, or all five of Gonzaga starters, were in double figures. Ike had just 10 on 4 of 11 shooting, 2 of 5 from the free throw line. If you told me before the game that Graham Ike was going to have just 10 points, he was going to shoot 4 of 11, which is one of the worst percentages of the season, he was only going to make 40% of his free throws, I would have been pretty worried about what else you were going to tell me about that game. That would have concerned me, knowing that was his stat line, that maybe Gonzaga might finally fell to Chris Gurlison in San Francisco, a team that I think is capable of beating Gonzaga, but just never found a way to get over that hump this year. Because in particular, Gonzaga's backcourt was just phenomenal in this game. It's hard to even know where to start. You could start with Ben Gregg, you could start with Anton Watson, and we will get to the performances of those guys. But I'm going to start with Nolan Hickman. Nolan Hickman had 20 points in this game. He had 6 assists. He was 7 of 11 from the field. At one point, he had all 20 of his points on 7 of 9 shooting. He missed his final 2 shots, but he had 20 points on 9 field goal attempts. Sometimes you'll see somebody like Graham Ike do that because they'll get 6 or 7 points from the free throw line. For Nolan Hickman, a guard who predominantly shoots 3-pointers, to have 20 points on 9 field goal attempts. Again, he finished on 11 field goal attempts, but to have gotten to that point is phenomenal. 2 of 3 from the three-point line for him. He hit clutch shots. He did most of his damage in the second half. That's something we've kind of seen at times from Hickman, not entirely. He's also had great first halves. I don't want to label him as only a second half performer, but he is certainly a clutch performer. He really seems to step up when Gonzaga needs him. For a player who has had consistency issues, for a player who has kind of gotten some of the ire of the fan base in the past, it feels like when Nolan Hickman's taking a shot in a moment where Gonzaga needs a bucket, that it's going to go down. That has been true of him throughout the year, and it was true of him on Monday night against the Dons. Ryan Nembhard, though, what else can be said about who Ryan Nembhard has been since mid-January? 16 points in this game. He also had 12 assists and 6 rebounds. He had 2 steals. He was 2 of 3 from deep. So Hickman and Nembhard combined to go 4 of 6 from deep. They combined to have 18 assists. Folks, you want to guess how many turnovers they had combined? Big old goose egg. 18 assists and 0 turnovers combined for your 2 starting guards who played, you betcha, all 80 minutes in this one combined. 40 minutes for Nembhard, 40 minutes for Hickman, 18 combined turnovers, 0 assists, 18 combined assists, 0 turnovers, 4 of 6 from 3 combined. Unbelievable. Nembhard's ability to get to the paint, get to the spots he wanted to get. He threw up a lot of those little floaters. He drew contact, got to the free throw line. Incredible, incredible stuff from Ryan Nembhard. When he is playing at this level, forget Graham Ike. We love him, but forget Graham Ike. Forget Nolan Hickman's glow up recently. Forget Ben Gregg. Again, we'll talk about him momentarily in his move into the starting lineup. When Ryan Nembhard is playing like this, when he's getting to his spots, when he is making his reads, when he is beating everybody up and down the floor for the entire game, this Gonzaga team is borderline unstoppable. He has played electric basketball for over 2 months now. And he's getting his love. He's getting his flowers. I think at this point, any Gonzaga fans who are still like, oh, what a disappointment he has been, we can just assume they stopped watching the season after the Santa Clara loss, or maybe even after the San Diego State loss. But Ryan Nembhard has not been that guy anymore. He has been incredible. Now, these 2 guys each playing 40 full minutes in this game is probably going to play a factor in Tuesday night's game against St. Mary's. Hopefully not a huge factor for Gonzaga, but certainly something to monitor as we get into that game. But we also want to talk about Ben Gregg. Ben Killian Tilly Gregg. Because Ben wears number 33. He goes to Las Vegas, and he torches San Francisco from beyond the arc in a huge critical game that the Zags need to win. That is exactly what Killian Tilly did a few years ago. Heck, I've told this story on the show before, but I'll tell it again. That's the reason my dog is named Tilly. I always wanted to name my dog after a basketball player. I'd always envisioned naming my dog Pangos. My wife and I decided to get a dog. She hadn't followed Gonzaga till she met me. Her first experience seeing Gonzaga live was those 3 games in Vegas when Killian Tilly went 14 of 15 from 3, hence why we have a dog named Tilly. Greg would be a little bit less interesting of a name for a dog than Tilly, so I'm not sure it would work. But he had a pretty similar performance. 17 points for him, 11 rebounds, 1 steal and a block, 4 of 7 from 3. Did a lot of his damage early in the second half when Gonzaga went on that massive run, hit a couple big threes. I think at one point he hit a 3 that gave them a 63-47 lead, and that's when you realize, oh, they buried him. They did it. This is what they did last time, and they did it again already against this team. Really great stuff from Ben. And then Anton Watson, 17 points and 7 boards. Did a lot of his damage very early in this one. It was interesting. San Francisco played way off of Watson and Gregg, which did not work strategically. They really did it to Watson, and it was an attempt to take away the high-low pass into Graham Ike. And I understand why Coach Gerlofson wanted to take that away. And we saw Watson at times almost kind of struggle with what to do. The amount of times in the second half, or late in the first half and in the second half, where he got the ball at the top of the key, his defender, usually Newberry, was way off of him, basically just standing in front of Graham Ike, and then Graham Ike's defender, Mobo or Markovetsky or whoever was behind him, and Watson would see 2 Dons in front of him and Graham Ike, who's heavily defended, and he would drive into that. And I think he was just kind of not sure what to do because there was such a unique defensive set. But once he figured out, okay, take the mid-range shot or, swing the ball around, find another way to get the ball to Graham, things really got better. Mark Few talked about it after the game. He kind of alluded to it being disrespectful the way that San Francisco defended Anton Watson and Ben Gregg. I think more so like that's how he kind of hyped those guys up of like, hey, if they're not going to guard you, shoot the dang ball. And Ben in particular really made them pay the way that he shot the basketball on this one. Zags overall 55% from three in this one, out-rebounded the Dons by 5, 2 more offensive rebounds. All the stuff you wanted to see from Gonzaga in this game. Most of it happened in the second half, but we definitely saw it. Another big win for the Zags, a quad 2 win for Gonzaga, because this game is actually on a neutral court as opposed to the Chase Center, which was a neutral court in a sense, but was for all intents and purposes within the net ranking system considered an away game for Gonzaga, therefore a quad 1 win. This game is a quad 2 win for the Zags. It means they are still 3-5 in quad 1 games. They are now up to 4-1 in quad 2 games. And at this point, with the net and the quad 1 system and everything that we've talked about, we're not talking about it from a perspective of, is this win helping them get into the tournament? We're there. No problems there. It's more of like, how far can this team climb in terms of seeding? Can they get off that 8-9 kind of dreaded, you got to play a 1 seed? Can they get off that 7-10 and get into the 6 seed conversation? We're going to talk about that as well as Gonzaga's upcoming matchup against against St. Mary's. They took care of Santa Clara. They set up the game we all expected to be seeing on Tuesday night. Can the Zags pull off another 2-0 week against the Dons and the Gaels? We're going to get to that after a word from today's sponsor, Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things just a little bit further? Have you ever wondered what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to that next level. First, there's the 2024 Nissan Rogue, which is perfect for both city drives and great escapes. If you need something, you can call on the class-exclusive built-in Google Assistant. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and the Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect mid-size crossover for your next adventure. Or how about the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, which has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced 4x4 available capability. With 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds of towing capacity, when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. So take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still talking WCC tournament as Gonzaga advances to the WCC Championship for the 27th consecutive year, a just incredible accomplishment dating back to the 2 years of Dan Monson's career. We're going to talk about Dan Monson momentarily, all of Mark Few's career. Gonzaga's in that WCC Championship game like clockwork. And lately, they're always playing the same team. Gonzaga versus St. Mary's, that is the matchup in that WCC Championship game. You can pretty much write it in ink. And this year, despite both teams struggling, despite St. Mary's flying out of the top 25 early in the year with early season losses, despite Gonzaga being considered a bubble team for months of the season, we're here. It's Tuesday night in Las Vegas, Orleans Arena. It's Gonzaga versus St. Mary's. In part, not only because Gonzaga beat San Francisco, but because St. Mary's took care of business against the Broncos of Santa Clara. 79-65 was the final score there for the Gaels. 4 of their 5 starters were in double figures, and we saw some interesting stuff. Alex Ducas, who hasn't been a big-time offensive contributor for St. Mary's. He's kind of been more deferential offensively, letting Aiden Mahaney and Augustus Marcelonis, and to an extent Mitchell Saxton, kind of take on more of an offensive role. But in this game, Ducas had 21 points on 7 made three-pointers, knocked down 7 triples. That's your 21 points right there, 7 of 11. Really nice game from Ducas, and certainly something to watch. Him having some momentum, some confidence in his ability to space the floor, that could be a problem for Gonzaga on Tuesday night. Additionally, one of the things we've talked about a handful of times in the last week or so is the loss of Joshua Jefferson for St. Mary's, and notably that he's been replaced by Mason Forbes, who is a physical player, tough player, veteran player, hard-nosed player, all that stuff, but he's not a good offensive player. And yet, against Santa Clara, who very clearly had a strategy to kind of play 4-on-5 basketball or make St. Mary's play 4-on-5 basketball by not really guarding Mason Forbes, it worked in the sense that Forbes still can't shoot from anywhere beyond 6 or 7 feet away from the rim, but Mason Forbes had 18 points on 8 of 9 shooting. St. Mary's found ways to get him the basketball. It was a lot of lobs under the rim. It was a lot of just open looks, some defensive lapses by Santa Clara that hopefully Gonzaga won't be able to have. But Mason Forbes, 18 points, his highest total since the opener of the season against Division II Stanislaus State. So this is his highest performing game against a Division I opponent. And he should have had more because Mason Forbes got 9 free throw attempts in this game. Folks, he made 2 of them. 2 of 9 from the free throw line. You may think, wow, that's a really bad game for a guy who's maybe not usually that bad. Well, on the season, he is 32%, 16 of 50 on the year. You'd be like, okay, well, the 2 of 9 is certainly dragging that down. Sure, but he's 47% for his career, which includes 3 years in the Ivy League at Harvard. Dude is a bad free throw shooter. The reason Gonzaga is not guarding him 10 feet outside the rim is because he can't make shots from out there. So if you're worried of seeing Mason Forbes have 18 points, Alex Ducas has 21 points. Yeah, it's not great that those two guys had, like, these 2 role players for St. Mary's had these big games leading into the third matchup between Gonzaga and the Gaels, but Mason Forbes can't shoot free throws. I think Gonzaga had a good defensive game plan against him last time. I think that they'll continue to do so. Ducas, look, if Alex Ducas beats you from 3, if you capably defend Saxon, you capably defend Marcellonis and Mahaney, and Alex Ducas goes nuclear hot from 3, you kind of got to tip your hat. Like, it sucks, but you cannot put a bunch of mental energy and physical energy into, completely neutralizing Alex Ducas. That just can't be the strategy in this game. I don't think he's going to do that again. If he has back-to-back seven 3-point performances in the WCC tournament, again, give him some golf claps because that's incredible, but I don't think that that's going to happen. For the Gaels, they still didn't have Henry Wessels. Of course, they still did not have Joshua Jefferson. He is out for the year. Only 8 total bench points for the Gaels. A lot of them come from Luke Barrett, who was not particularly good against Gonzaga last time out. I expect him to be more confident and better. He didn't look ready for that game, quite honestly. Somebody who's had some big performances for the Gaels off the bench this year, but he passed up a lot of open shots and I think could have had a better performance. He had 5 offensive rebounds against Santa Clara, which is notable. As we've talked about before, Santa Clara, one of the 5 tallest teams by average height in the entire country. So certainly for the Gaels to be able to exploit them on the offensive glass is something to keep in mind heading into this matchup on Tuesday night for Gonzaga. The WCC went chalk in the tournament. You got 1 versus 2. You had 3 versus 4, or 3 and 4 playing in the semifinals. Every single game, there's no upsets in the WCC tournament. And that's not really a surprise. The WCC, the standings were kind of not all that unexpected. LMU did a little worse than people expected them to do. Portland did a little bit better because they clipped LMU in those standings. But otherwise, pretty chalk. Pretty consistent. San Diego had a pretty good year. But again, the difference between some of those teams towards the bottom is just not that significant. In fact, not very many of these games were even all that competitive. The 2 Friday games were within 10 points. Every other game was a double-digit win for the team. I think the Gonzaga San Francisco game was the 3rd closest game in terms of the overall margin of victory, and it was a 12-point game that frankly didn't really feel like a 12-point game for Gonzaga the way they played in the second half. The 2 close games, San Diego beat Pepperdine by 5, 57-52. UP beat LMU by 8, 78-70. So what do the Zags need to do to get a victory here? Well, they need to attack Mitchell Saxon, like we know they're capable of doing, and try to get him in foul trouble. If he's not fouling, if he is playing really straight up defense, trying really hard to avoid fouls, then Graham's just going to score over the top of him. That's what he did in Moraga. He's going to continue to do that. If Graham is easily able to score in one-on-one situations over St. Mary's or over Saxon, great. If Saxon is fouling him and putting Graham on the free throw line, even better. If St. Mary's is doubling Graham, then he's going to have to figure out how to get the ball out of his hands, get the ball to Ryan Nembhard, let him create something with a mismatch, with a disadvantage for St. Mary's defensively. You can also bet that Randy Bennett is poring over the tape of the Gonzaga game against San Francisco and figuring out how did Coach Gerlifson, what did he do to prevent Ike from having the kind of offensive performance that he typically does. I guarantee you, as I'm recording this right now, that Randy Bennett is watching that as intently as he possibly can. You also need another vintage Ryan Nembhard performance. He was able to get into the paint whenever he wanted against St. Mary's these last 2 times out. That needs to happen again. Because at the end of the day, for Graham Ike to get slowed down by St. Mary's, they have to stop Ryan Nembhard. Because if he can get past St. Mary's defenders, get into the paint, he creates havoc. Big men have to rotate over to stop him from getting wide open lay-ins. He is capable of then making that little bounce pass to Graham Ike under the rim. At that point, Ike is less than a foot away from the basket. Mitchell Saxon's having to rotate back on him defensively after Nembhard makes that pass. Saxon's best course of action is to pretty much get out of the way or risk committing a foul and either giving up an and one bucket, which is the worst case scenario, or just giving up points to Graham Ike. Like, you just can't do much in that situation. So you need Ryan Nembhard to have a great performance. You need Graham Ike to have a great performance. And I think you need to force, I mentioned Ducas a little bit, you need to force him or Forbes or Luke Barrett to beat you. Don't get beat by Aiden Mahaney and Augustus Marcelonis. Don't give up a 20 spot to Mitchell Saxon on the block. Make the role players beat you. If Gonzaga loses to St. Mary's because Ducas has 20 plus points, because Mason Forbes has another career night, because Luke Barrett goes crazy off the bench, it still stings, it still hurts, it still sucks. But you'd rather that than be so focused on the role players that you're letting the star players beat you. You just can't let them do that. Slow down the guards like they've done throughout the season. Put pressure on those guards. Half court pressure, quarter court trap, whatever you want to do. Make them get rid of the basketball. Make somebody else beat you, because frankly, I don't think those other guys can. What does a win mean for the Zags? Well, if they win this game, they move up to 4-5 in quad one. They're 4-1 in quad two games. They are currently, as we're recording this, 16th in the net on Tuesday. They will move up in the net, especially if it's a blowout. But even if it's just a win, they will probably move up. St. Mary's is 17th right now, so they won't clip them, but they will probably move up in the spot. Reasonable to expect that Gonzaga would go into Selection Sunday, top 15 in the net, top 15 in KenPom, with an 8-6 combined quad one and quad two record. Folks, we've been talking about Gonzaga as a 6 seed, maybe a 7 seed. That resume might be a 5 seed. Folks, I'm a little nervous to say this out loud, but that resume might be a 4 seed. It depends on what other teams happen, and I'm certainly not throwing down money on Gonzaga getting a 4 seed with the season that they've had, but we need to talk about it a little bit, and we'll talk about it more on Wednesday's show after this game, because of course Gonzaga still has 40 minutes of business that they need to take care of before we can really have this conversation. But I'm telling you right now, we're going to have this conversation if Gonzaga wins this game, because their resume is better than people think, and not just from a net perspective, from a lot of other perspectives. This team could be a 5 seed. That is realistic to believe for the Gonzaga Bulldogs, which is crazy considering some of the conversations we all were having back in January, even in the early parts of February. Well, there was never any of those kind of conversations about Lisa Fortier and the women's basketball team, as the Lady Zags now take on Portland in a rematch of last year's WCC title game. Can they avoid what happened in 2023 when Portland stunned them? And can they complete an undefeated regular season and WCC conference tournament campaign? More on all of that after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 in your pocket if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite Zags and the NBA players and your favorite teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Mark Few's team favored by 3.5 points tonight against the Gaels of St. Mary's. Going to be a tight one, but wouldn't shock me if Gonzaga can win by more than that, especially if they knock them down at the charity stripe at the end of that game. If you want to join me in making some money on the Zags in this one, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 3 here, closing out the show. Moving on to talk about Lisa Fortier and the women's basketball team. They defeated Pacific by 11 points, 72-61, in the WCC semifinals on Monday. They are now advancing to the WCC Championship game on Tuesday at 1 p.m. on ESPNU, where they will take on the Portland Pilots. Talking a little bit about this Pacific game, Eliza Hollingsworth. Shout out to Eliza for being the leading scorer for the Zags in this one. She had 20 points and 12 rebounds, on 7 of 13 shooting. She knocked down 3 of her 6 3-point attempts. She also had 3 assists, 2 steals, and a block. Really great performance from her, fifth-year senior, kind of the unsung hero of that starting lineup for the Zags. We talk a lot about the Trunk twins. We talk a lot about Brenda Maxwell's outside shooting. We talk a whole bunch about Yvonne Ejim, who's one of the best players in the country, but Eliza has been a steadying force for this team, and she deserves some flowers for putting up 20 points in a must-win game for Gonzaga against this Pacific team. Ejim had a great game as well, 18 and 13. Brenna Maxwell and Kaylin Trung each had three-pointers apiece. Really great stuff from the Lady Zags in this game, and they advanced to take on Portland in the WCC title game. Like we said, 1 p.m. ESPNU is a rematch of last year's title game. Portland won that one. If you remember, last year's Gonzaga team had an excellent non-conference. We're cruising through conference play, not quite as dominant as this year's version, but we're still very good. Then they got tripped up by Santa Clara on the road. Then they lost to Portland in the WCC Championship game. That was enough to knock them all the way down to a 9 seed. They fell to Ole Miss in the first round of that game. Ole Miss then went ahead and beat number 1 seeded Stanford in the second round. Kind of a tough watch for the Gonzaga women's team last year. This year, no more mystery about that. No ugly WCC regular season losses. Now take care of business against the Pilots, who you beat, mind you, by 50, 5-0, not 15, 50. 90-40 was the final score the last time these two teams met. And it wasn't early in the season. It was their second to most recent game. It was their last regular season game. Last regular season game for the Pilots, or for the Zags, they beat them by 50. On the road at the Child Center, they only, put that in quotes, won by 21. They have crushed this team this season. If they do it again, there is no doubt in my mind, okay, maybe a little bit of doubt. There's a little bit of doubt that the Zags will earn a 4 seed, and they'll play in Spokane, and they'll get a chance to play in Portland in the third round games, assuming they run through the Spokane thing. If you're a 13 seed, if you're a 5 seed and you got to play Gonzaga in Spokane, you are not going to be happy about that result. But this team, if they win against Portland, there is no excuse to not put them on that 4 line in Spokane. It should be automatic for the selection committee. One of the first games that they just pencil in or throw it in Sharpie and just toss it up on the board, because there's no doubt that that's where they should be. Want to close out the show shouting out Dan Monson. Dan Monson out at Long Beach State after 17 seasons coaching at Beach. Mutual parting of ways, according to a press release. Coming off an 18 and 14 season in the Big West this year, just 10 and 10 in conference play, finished 5th. It looked like they were going to have a better year. They have some really talented players on this roster. I saw them live in their season opener, which was on the road against the Portland Pilots. Portland actually won that game, but Long Beach looked solid. They looked like the team that was going to be good. And then after that Portland loss, they picked up 3 wins that should have aged well, but unfortunately they did not. They got a win at DePaul, the worst Power 6 team in the country. They got a win against Michigan, perhaps the most disappointing team in college basketball. And then they got a win against USC. Guess what? That one didn't age well either. 3 wins that should have been better, but unfortunately were not. They, like I said, only went 500 in the Big West. They had losses to Portland, like we talked about, also Illinois State and Louisiana in non-conference. Now, Monson is going to coach throughout the rest of the season, going to coach this team in the Big West tournament and any postseason tournaments they may end up playing in, but he is out after this. Mutual parting of ways is sometimes coded language to just explain a firing that they don't want to explain as a firing, but it could also be a kind of a semi-retirement for Monson, maybe an actual retirement, maybe taking a year off. Who knows the actual situation? Monson's been doing this for a very long time. His 272 wins at Long Beach State is most in school history. He is the most prolific college basketball coach at Long Beach State ever. He also has the 5th most wins in the entire Big West Conference history. Again, one of the best coaches that conference has ever seen. He was a 4-time Big West Coach of the Year. He also won it for Gonzaga back in 1998. So 5 Coach of the Years, 4 regular season titles. This is just all at Long Beach State specifically. He also made 4 NIT appearances and made the NCAA tournament in 2012 when they were a 12 seed and they lost to a 5-seeded New Mexico team. However, the success lately just hasn't quite been there. Only 1 Big West title since 2013. That came in 2022, I believe. Yes. Now, they won 3 Big West titles in a row in 2011, 2012, 2013. Prolific stretch of basketball for Dan Monson right there. It was the Casper Ware and the James Ennis era. Those 2 guys played in the NBA. Really, really talented players. To have both of them on the roster overlapping really, really helped Long Beach State be the dominant force in the Big West, helped Monson win all those games and be the program or be the coach that we knew he was capable of being. 17 years at Long Beach State, but he's known, of course, in many ways for being the coach of Gonzaga prior to Mark Few. Only coached Gonzaga as a head coach for 2 years in 97, 98, and 98, 99. He went 24 and 10 and won a WCC regular season title in 1998, but that team missed the big dance. Hasn't happened since then, because the next year, 98-99, they went 28-7. They were a 10 seed in the NCAA tournament. They beat Minnesota, a 7 seed in the first round. They beat number 2 seeded Stanford in the second round. In the third round, they played Florida. You might have known what happened in the 1998 game between the Gonzaga Bulldogs and the Florida Gators. Quentin Hall shot a runner. Casey Calvary tipped it in. Gus Johnson went nuclear, calling the game, called it the slipper still fits. Iconic basketball call, iconic name for Gonzaga. And that they took off from there. Speaking of taking off, Dan Monson did. After that job, after that season, that tremendous run, he did what most coaches do, not criticizing him at all. Most coaches do this. He took a Power 6 job, Power 5 job. He went to Minnesota. Head coaching job in a Big Ten. I get it. I get why that happened. Didn't go great for him with the Golden Gophers, 118 and 106 there. He did make the NCAA tournament in the 04-05 season as an 8 seed, lost to a 9 seeded Iowa State team in the first round, got fired a few years later after a 2-5 start in 2006, 2007. Took over at Long Beach State the next year and has been there ever since until now. If he's retiring, hats off to him and his family. Tremendous, successful career. If he's looking to get back into the industry, I know he'll get hired, whether it's as a head coach, whether it's as an associate head coach, whatever job he may want in this field, I'm sure he will find a way to get it. 442 career wins for him, 395 losses, 5 Coach of the Year honors, like we said. He's coached 837 career games so far. He will coach at least one more in the Big West tournament. That's 72nd all-time. Top 75 all-time in terms of total number of games coached in college basketball for Dan Monson. Few for the record is at 855, so only about 15 ahead of Dan Monson in terms of total games coached. Tremendous career for Dan Monson. Want to give him a shout here as the architect of that first great Gonzaga team and really the catalyst for what has become an absolute powerhouse program that Mark Few has really helped build, in part because of that stepping stone started by Dan Monson. That's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. We'll be back, of course, on Wednesday, recapping that WCC Championship game, talking about what the result was and what it means for Gonzaga in terms of seeding into the NCAA tournament. We'll talk about similar stuff with the women's team as well. All that coming up later this week. Until then, thank you so much for listening. And as always, go Zags.